create the interconnection between those critical aspects that we said are national interests, and also the idea of the domestic political aspects. The whole spectacle around international relations touches on matters relevant to international politics. And so if we are talking about national interest, then it is more often than not driven by the demands and the dictates of what matters domestically in terms of the political aspects of that state. Any government that takes control of the affairs of a state comes in and it articulates its desires, its aspirations for the nation, oftentimes in terms of what we call the foreign policy of a state. And the foreign policy captures those critical aspects of the national interest. And earlier on, I talked about diplomacy. So diplomacy comes in and fits in because it now becomes the tool that they use towards pursuing those national interests. One fundamental question is to ask, are national interests really national? Because when we say that they are national interests, it is like we mean that they capture the aspirations of everybody within the nation. But the reality is that possibly what is christened or named national interests could just be but those specific interests of a few individuals. So the fundamental question of, are national interests really national? Somebody would argue, no, they are not, because at times it could be just a few interests propagated by a few individuals that are being put across. So there is that broad relationship. What happens domestically in terms of the politics of the state has a way in which it shapes what goes on internationally in terms of what the state is engaged in. And vice versa, what happens in the international political situation, in the international system, again, at times affects what happens domestically within a state. We also have what we term as the levels of national interest. We talk of supreme interests. Those are the very important interests that a state would do whatever it takes to defend. Some of them would actually go to war to try to defend those kind of interests. We talk about what we might call vital interests. These are also very important, and states would do whatever it takes to also defend them, but not at the level that you would actually find them defending those supreme interests. Then we also at times talk about what we call strategic interests. Those particular positions that states may want to take because they touch on issues of value, matters of value, things that actually matter to a state. For instance, forging good relations with particular individuals in a region. If you look at the Horn of Africa region, for instance, then you find that the United States of America, for instance, as the global superpower, has an interest in this region, and therefore it has even set a base, a military base in Djibouti. If you look at Kenya, for instance, in this region, it has a deep strategic interest in the East African region, and that is why it takes a very active role within the East African community. We also have what are termed as tactical interests. And by tactical interests, we mean those components or aspects that touch on the various tactics or strategies that states would actually put in place to try to actualize some interests that they may have. The other thing that is also very important in terms of a level of national interest is what we call national concerns. By this we mean those important values that states hold very dear to themselves. And one of the critical examples is in the world today, there is a very firm belief that a concept like democracy is very important, for the states around the world. Some states would also be driven by national concerns or values that touch around issues to do maintenance of environment, human rights, for instance, the need to embrace good governance, the need to ensure that there is transparency and accountability, the need to ensure that there are values like justice that are being observed around the world, the need to ensure that there is public participation. Because what the state is seeking to achieve through its national interests, which they craft into their foreign policy, would be for the good of the citizenry. That critical segment of the distinctive characteristics of a state that we said is the population. You're doing it for the sole good of your citizenry.